There are times when we come across a story that we did not have much expectations going into it, and then coming out thoroughly enjoying it all. Not your favorite story, but you loved it nonetheless. Well, that was it for me with the game I Am Setsuna. The premise of the story is of a sacrificial pilgrimage that has to be done by a young girl so that the monsters that terrorize their world will stop, or at the very least, not do that as much. Think something like Final Fantasy X or Tales of Symphonia. The main character is a mercenary and is accompanying the girl to her destination along with others joining you on this voyage for their own reasons. Based on the title of the game, you can probably guess the girl in this case is named Setsuna. And you would be correct. Then you have the character that you play as Endir or Nether. I believe, from what I've heard, it is a Norse name, and thus it should be pronounced something along the lines of Nether. But that's besides the point. There are other characters involved as well, but they don't really come to mind when I think of the game. Setsuna does come to mind mainly due to the title. There is a problem. The cover of the game does not promote a character, but rather a setting. The cover is not an end-all be-all, as the creators can always give it a new cover, but it is our first exposure to what the game is about. To see what I am talking about, let's take Final Fantasy X's cover. We have Titus in the center, which tells us that he is an important character to the story, which is a safe guess is to say he is the protagonist, which he is. Then we can add the shore where he stands, which tells us that the ocean is an important aspect of the story. There is a lot more to dissect, but we will leave it at that, because Titus and the ocean, or at the very least water, are some things that are very relevant and are associated with Final Fantasy X. Now, back to I Am Setsuna. There are a few things I can talk about from the cover, like the silhouette or the orange tree or even the mountain. Well, I would guess it's more of a hill. There is a mountain and a hill. Anyways, something else attracts my attention though, the snow. This is why I am making this video. What I really mean is I want to talk about is how this game uses one thing to represent the themes, but more specifically the creative choice to have snow be the symbolic representation of the story. At first I thought nothing of it, but after some time I began to wonder why I associate the game with snow. What a stupid question. The setting of the game is in a snowy region. Why else? Some of you might say. And to that I say, fair point. I should probably rephrase the question to more along the lines of what is the reason for having snow be the basis of the setting? Well, tone. Tone is only one aspect. The story has a somber tone with the moments of hope and despair sprinkled throughout. When you travel through the land, there is this sense of loneliness with the lack of things in the overworld, but with monsters roaming the land. Well, the monsters don't really roam the overworld, but rather more the dungeons, but that's besides the point. There is very little they can do except survive in their little settlements, or at least the residents that lives there, with limited travel from place to place due to the harsh realities, as well as the natural dangers. Due to the natural dangers of the world, both snow and the monsters, making it rather difficult. I had thought about rain and how it would change the tone, because you definitely can use rain for these aspects as well. And well, the feeling I get from rain is more polarizing, like sadness and gloomy comes to mind, but they're a little too harsh, I would say, even for how effective snow can be at evoking some level of powerful emotions. Even when I thought about after the rain, depending on the environment, it could be hopeful or a new start of kind of feeling. There is is loneliness, but it is not quite the right feeling, and neither is depression. There is a sense of emptiness, but it is more like being stranded on an island and figuring out how to survive, or at the very least, that is how I see it. And that is not something I really associate with rain. I could go on about the differences, but it became clear enough to me for me to see that any other setting would not have the same effect. It may come close, but there will be subtle differences that differentiates them from each other, which is not a bad thing. In this game, there are several sediments, and most of them don't have harsh snowfall. There is a sense of calmness or solitude. It makes me think of being stranded in the ocean when the waters are calm, but what lurks underneath is something to be wary of, because the citizens live relatively happy lives behind the walls of their cities, but there is this fear of monsters if they leave the borders, or even monsters breaking through their defenses. To further emphasize the dangers of traveling, there are no inns in the game. Not to say people don't travel, but rather it is unusual for people to do that. But, if they do, there are usually certain kinds of people, or making the choice to live in a different town for such travel to happen. In other words, having an inn is meaningless. Another thing to add to the lack of harsh snow in the town area is that the towns are bright and snow-covered in snow for the most part. There are some parts that's not quite covered in snow, but this could be taken as having hope despite their harsh reality. But the perpetual snowy lands could be implying that death is inevitable. Either the monsters will overrun the world, or, I guess, spoilers, Setsuna is destined to die. No matter what happened, Setsuna was going to die. First from Nether's contract, then the pilgrimage, then when she actually died. At the end, to die with the lonely soul, to end the reign of monsters. This works because Setsuna always had compassion for her enemies and believed in extra chances and the good in them. This is the purity of the white snow and the symbolic meaning of the end. Setsuna's connection to the overreaching symbolism of snow further emphasizes the power of using something like snow as your centerpiece of the story. When all this works together, you can get a cohesive story with different elements working in harmony with each other, elevating the effectiveness of the experience and meaning behind the work of art. The story does not go beyond this scope, and it works to its benefit. By not cramming too much to the story, it does not bog down the overall experience of the game. Nothing fancy, nothing new, just doing what works and doing it well. The game is also not a super long game, so it does not overstay its welcome. As stories that stick to a particular range in pace and or tone can be tiring after some time, while this is a safe story with no real risk into making an unforgettable experience. It likely will not be anyone's favorite. It does not do much to really stand out from the next big thing, but I think that it is okay, because sometimes all you want is something small, simple, and enjoyable. They knew what kind of game they were making, and they executed well. Sure, having a game like Xenoblade with all the things that go on in the story with the highs and lows can be exhilarating, but still take a lot out of you, where a game like Setsuna can be used to take a break from something that can be so emotionally taxing and need to cool down from a high intensity game and or story. Then again, you could simply just like these kinds of story, and as a part of the niche that this game is in. In terms of storytelling, you do not need to have only one thing to symbolically represent your story, but it helps to make it easier to understand with clarity the focus of it. If you do decide to use multiple things to represent aspects of the story, it might be helpful to keep Sanderson's third law of magic systems in mind, which is to expand on what you already have before adding anything new. Admittedly, I am not entirely sure how well using Sanderson's third law of magic system would be, but I do believe that this kind of advice is generally going to be to one's own benefit as opposed to their detriment. And with that, goodbye.